I'd like to welcome you all to this year's ALA University of Maryland's lecture series. My name is Keith Marzullo. I'm delighted to be the Dean of the College of Information Studies here at the University of Maryland. It's my pleasure to introduce our two discussants today. I'll start first with Lessa. Lessa Kanani'opua Pelayo-Lozada is the Adult Services Assistant Manager of the Palos Verdes Library District in Rolling Hills Estates, California, which is a beautiful part of the world. I've never been there. She is the 2022-23 President of the American Library Association. Her service and accomplishments are long and impactful. This is just an abbreviated list. She recently completed a term as ALA Executive Board member and was elected Council at Large for 3 terms. She's an active member of the 1876 Club, the Association for Library Services to Children, CORE, Leadership Infrastructure Futures, the Public Library Association, the Rainbow Roundtable, the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, and the Sustainability Roundtable. She is also a member of several ALA professional affiliates, including the Asian Pacific American Library Association, the Black Caucus American Library Association, the Chinese American Librarians Association, the American Indian Library Association, and the National Association for Library and Information Services Latinos and Hispanic speaking. She has held ALA membership for 13 years, more than 13 years. She holds her MLIS and a BA in sociology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an associate degree in philosophy from El Camino College in Torrance, California. Other discussant is Joseph Thompson. Joe is the Director of Public Services for the Carroll County Public Library and has previously worked in library administration at the Hartford County Public Library and Western Maryland Regional Library. He's immediate past chair of the American Library Association's Committee on Legislation. His past professional experience includes serving as president of the Maryland Library Association and president of the Reference and User Services Association. He received his MLS in 2001 from the wonderful College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. So, welcome them both here. And I'd like to hand this off to Joe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Keith. And it is such a pleasure here to be able to interview Lessa this evening or afternoon, depending what time it is where you are. This is a first time that Lessa and I are really getting a chance to have a conversation. We've met a few times here and there at meetings, but I'm really looking forward to getting to hear your thoughts on a lot of these really urgent issues that are facing libraries today. So thank you for joining us, Lessa.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm really excited to be in dialogue with you. And I know you're interviewing me, but I love you also to provide any insights that you want to as we go along too.
Well, if you'd like to ask me any questions along the way, you're welcome to it. It can certainly be a conversation. So first, I think, especially since we are doing this for the iSchool at University of Maryland College Park, it's good to start with just hearing about your history and hear from you as a volunteer leader in the American Library Association. How did you get involved in ALA? What was your path, and maybe what would be your advice for students who want to get engaged in this kind of important work?
Absolutely. So I joined my ALA student chapter when I was in graduate school. I will admit I'm not much of a joiner, but I was like, if this is going to be my profession, this is what I have to do, right? This is part of it. I wanted to make sure that I made a commitment and had a responsibility to the association and the profession as a whole. But I actually came into ALA work through the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. So I was in Virginia Walters's children's literature class, and she found out that I was mixed race Native Hawaiian and said, oh, you should join APALA in addition to ALA, because this can kind of, provide you a home and you might feel comfortable. And there's a lot of opportunities for you to be able to engage. And so I just joined. I wasn't really an active member until a couple of years later. I had graduated, and it was 2009 in the middle of a recession. And so nobody was hiring library workers. I was applying to, every single job that was out there, but so was everybody else. And so was everybody else who had been laid off in the Los Angeles area. And so I was looking for other ways to build my skills, to make connections, to really figure out if the profession was for me. You know, I was looking at possibly years of not getting a job, and I wasn't sure if it was because it was me, the environment, or what the situation was. But during that time in 2009, 2010, Camila Alire was president of the American Library Association. And one of her presidential initiatives was a series of multicultural, intergenerational family literacy programs. And so Apala had volunteered to be one of these, and I was asked, or encouraged, strongly encouraged, I should say, to volunteer my skills to help develop this family literacy program. And so Apala's, it turned out to be called Talk Story. I had a wonderful time. I helped to develop the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander story time. And because of that, I also got a travel award to go to my first ALA annual conference. Well, the first day, I should say, it wasn't my first. The first one I had a good time at. The first one I went to, I was a student. I was so overwhelmed. It was in Anaheim, California, right next to Disneyland. And I was like, I don't know if I can ever do this again. There's so many people. There's so many great things, but it was very overwhelming. So I got this travel grant to go to Washington, D.C., and there kind of solidified my path to ALA, I think, because I met so many wonderful and encouraging people who wanted to hear what I had to say, who were passionate about libraries just like I was, and who could offer advice when I was feeling, you know, pretty down and frustrated and not sure where I wanted to go. It also opened up opportunities for me to build the skills that would make me more competitive in the job market. I was gaining leadership skills and project management skills that I didn't necessarily have in library school, or at least came through a different lens. So those really encouraged me. And then that step right into ALA was from Apala, I became an ALA emerging leader in 2011. And so that emerging leader experience, it's a year-long experience for folks that are not familiar in leadership development within ALA. So you learn about ALA's structure and how it organizes itself and all of the different parts that make up the association. And you also get to work on a project. So my project at that time was for LAMA, which is now CORE, part of CORE, but was the Library Leadership and Management Division. And so I really just felt like this was the place for me to make a contribution. Even once I got that full-time job, it was still some place for me to, again, connect with a larger network, to continue building my skills, and to feel like I was a part of a community when I didn't always feel like I was a part of a community in my library or by myself. And so I think that my advice for students would be, you know, to fill out volunteer forms. You know, first become a member, join your student chapter if you are a student chapter member. My student chapter at UCLA used to do events as well, which were really wonderful opportunities for us to be able to engage and find out what was happening at the national level. But I can tell you, as president, making those committee appointments, we read all of those volunteer forms, and we are looking for passionate and enthusiastic new professionals to bring those fresh eyes for folks who have been in the profession a long time, to help us think of new and innovative ways and how to move forward. And so definitely fill out those volunteer forms, join a roundtable, join a division, find your place within the association, and try different things. You don't have to be locked into one thing for the entirety of your membership in ALA or even your profession, to be quite honest. There are so many different things that you can try at different places. And if you're able to attend conference, please do, because as overwhelming as that first one might feel like, you can make so many wonderful connections with folks. If you attend meetings, if you attend events, I'm very introverted. So my goal always is just to talk to one new person every day in situations like that. You don't have to meet everybody. Just make it, you know, make it work for you, because those connections and networks are going to be the best investment that you can make into your professional career.
I love your recommendation to try different things out. And I think your experience of being overwhelmed at your first ALA, a lot of people can identify with that, especially maybe when they've only come from like a smaller regional conference or a state conference. Going to ALA can just seem like, oh my gosh, there's too many options, too much going on. So I love your suggestion of just trying different smaller things out. If it doesn't work out, like try something else. That's a wonderful approach. I very much identify with that too. I want to follow up a little bit. You were talking about your experience with APALA, the Chinese American Library Association, AILA, and Reforma. I know you've been a member of a lot of these different affiliate organizations and some of the roundtables. Could you talk about how your participation in some of these groups has influenced your approach to library work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the great things is, so I joined APALA because that was part of my identity and part of who I was. But I joined a lot of these other groups because although I am not necessarily, African American, or I am Indigenous, right, but I don't speak Spanish, it's important for me to understand the opportunities and challenges of all of these different groups, especially within the LIS sphere. And so when you join as an ally, you are showing that you care, showing that you want to support the communities, even if you're not a member of the community. And you can also see where your power and your privilege can be the most helpful as an ally in these communities, whether it's helping to elevate voices or also providing mentoring, providing financial contributions. There's so many different ways that we can be connected. And I think that when we are able to recognize and embrace the intersectionalities that we have as library workers, but also that our communities have, then we can really move from talking about what a diverse and equitable and inclusive institution looks like to having tangible actions where we can take on in our professional lives and our institutions rather than just lip service. So I think that it's really important for us also to make sure that we are putting ourselves in spaces where we also aren't always comfortable, where we aren't always the know-it-alls or have all of the experiences, because that's how we really grow. And that's also how our communities need us to grow. When we're planning programs and services for them, we don't always end up in libraries with communities that look like us. And so we need to be able to figure out how to navigate that and how to welcome every single person through our doors. So I think that's really important. I think that especially the mentoring aspect for me, I've met so many great mentors through a lot of these different affiliate programs, because how we approach leadership is different in so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds. And so to have all of those ideas in your head and hold space for them just makes us better and makes us continue to get to those inclusive spaces that we want to be.
And do you have any thoughts, recommendations for all of us who would like to see the profession become more representative of those communities that we're serving?
Yeah, I think that some of the ways that we can do that is, of course, to join these organizations, to support these organizations with our dollars, also with our volunteer labor. A lot of these groups put on conferences and need bodies to help put on those conferences. It is no small feat to be able to do those things and volunteer in the ways that we can and show up in different ways that we can. And I think, if we're talking about the diversity of the profession, also making sure that when we are working in institutions, that we are not just replicating the toxic environments and the racist environments in institutions that have come before us. It is not easy work to really sit down and look at your policies, look at your work culture, and figure out how to be inclusive spaces. But it is work that has been done by many organizations with really excellent models. For example, the Government Alliance in Racial Equity is a great one if you are a city library or work within a city government, on what that modeling can look like for creating anti-racist and inclusive structures, but making sure that we're doing the work so that when we recruit people of color and of different backgrounds, that we can also keep them as well. And another big aspect of that is also just listening, right? Listening and believing another person's story. Just because you don't see it or you didn't mean to say that or mean to do that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. And so just always being open, I think, to the idea that we are growing individuals individuals, and we will never stop growing if we're doing, I think, life right. Are just some ways that I think that we can really get to kind of an anti-racist profession and institutions.
Thank you so much. And I know that there's a lot of people here that are probably expecting us to talk about a lot of the challenges around book banning and censorship that many libraries are experiencing right now. So I want to make sure to give you time to talk about some of the things that you're doing and some of the things that the American Library Association is doing. So what is ALA doing right now to confront some of these challenges, and what can each of us be doing to help protect the freedom to read?
Absolutely. So just in case folks haven't heard, although I don't know how you could, the Office for Intellectual Freedom has tracked the highest record number of attempts to ban books in its 20-year history. So over 1,200 attempts this year to 2,500 titles. And I think it's really important to note that these trends are different than what we've been seeing in the past. So what we saw in the past were usually one-to-one interactions. So a parent or a community member might see a book on the shelf or read a book and think that it wasn't a good fit for the community, and so then go through the reconsideration process. But now what we're seeing are organized attempts to ban books. And these organized attempts look like, out of all the challenges last year, 90% were challenges to multiple titles. So not just one or two. And 40% of those challenges were 100 titles or more. So you can imagine, probably not individuals who have read all of these titles. Often these lists were given to libraries who didn't even own all of these titles in their collections. And so these organized groups are targeting LGBTQ and BIPOC voices specifically, and histories to silence them. And it just mirrors what is happening within our society as well, this divisiveness that we're seeing, this pushback with anti-trans legislation, anti-LGBTQ, don't say gay bills, things like that. And so what we're doing at the American Library Association is a little bit what we've always done and a little bit of some new things as well. And so what the Office for Intellectual Freedom has always done and continues to do is to provide one-on-one confidential support to individuals and libraries who are experiencing challenges. This could look like solidifying a policy, solidifying the collection development policy, the reconsideration policy. This could look like what grassroots organization looks like within the community to get those who are against book censorship to stand up and speak out. It can also look like providing legal information and legal contacts within a community if there might be legislation at stake or somebody's job at stake. And those are a few examples of what is occurring. There's also already on the website examples of selection policies and toolkits that you can use to make sure that before a book challenge even comes, you are ready for it, and to practice with your staff ahead of time how to receive a formal complaint, what that process and that procedure is, because that is often kind of the core of making sure that we are going through this process intentionally and carefully. And then there's also the merit fund. So if individuals are experiencing job or financial loss due to defending intellectual freedom, the merit fund is available to help offset some of those costs. So that's what some of the things that the Office for Intellectual Freedom is doing. But we also have the Unite Against Book Bans campaign. And so that's available at uniteagainstbookbans.org and contains so much wonderful information to help combat book bans. So Unite Against Book Bans is a campaign with our over 70 institutional partners, as well as thousands of individuals who have taken the pledge to unite against book bans. At the website is a toolkit to help empower individuals to write op-ed letters to your local newspaper, to write letters to your school and library board saying what an impact these books make on our lives and how essential they are. There's also information on how to start your own banned books club, right? Because one of the first ways that we can combat misinformation is by providing individuals with the information, looking at the books that are being challenged and trying to understand why, and why also just because a book isn't right for one person doesn't mean it's not right for another person, and what freedom of access and the freedom to read really means for individuals. And so Also at Unite Against Book Bans, some other things that might be helpful are a white paper on the empowerment of reading and how essential it is to our youth to be able to have access to books that help them to understand complex issues, that help them to develop empathy, that help them to do their homework. You know, some of the books that we're seeing banned are things that are essential to our students' curriculum and their growth and their development. And so I think it's really important also to recognize, as we're talking about book bans, that it is a vocal minority that are trying to challenge books. ALA did a survey in March of 2022 that found that 71% of those polled, bipartisan polling, so Democrat, Republican, Independent, all across the spectrum, 71% were opposed to book challenges in public libraries. And that poll also showed from over 90% trust their library workers, have trust that they are making the right decisions for their communities. So we know that we are trusted partners. We know that we have the majority on our side. We just have to make sure that the majority is using their voice to help us fight against book bans, because we cannot do it alone.
I'm so glad you talked about Unite Against Book Bans as a new initiative. I think it launched a little over a year ago at this point. Maybe it's a little longer. But you know, it's really making a difference, and I know I've used it as a resource a number of times. And I just want to echo something that you alluded to. Like, I know as a volunteer leader in the organization too, that whenever I renew my ALA membership, I'm always thinking about the impact that it has on supporting the Office for Intellectual Freedom and all the good work they do, often behind the scenes, that the broader community of us in libraries just don't know about, because a lot of that work has to happen in coordination with local libraries, with state chapters, and it's so useful, so needed, and it really helps alleviate a lot of the difficulties that happen at that local level by having that support from the national organization. So yeah, anyway, when you pay your dues, it really does make a difference.
It does. Also, Joe, just really quickly, I think it's really important to note that often we hear, what is ALA doing? Because I don't see anything. And to your point, and to the point I made earlier, is that so much of what we do is behind the scenes, because it has to be behind the scenes. This is happening on the local level within our communities. And so if a national organization comes in and, you know, puts their ideologies on top of, you know, what a community thinks is right for them, then we're actually often going to do more harm than good. And so a lot of that what your ALA dollars are going to is that confidential, behind the scenes support that happens every day, but we can't talk about it.
That's right. Well, while we're talking about challenges, I was wondering, do you see other challenges facing the profession that you'd like to talk about as well?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the challenges that we're facing right now are not independent of book bans either. I think that the book challenges we're going through exacerbate kind of the three other major challenges that I see in the profession. And so number one is, I think, funding. You know, our funding is always often, you know, one of the first things that are on a chopping block, especially if we are in a public setting and tax dollars are involved. You know, are they going to fund the police, or are they going to fund the library? And what does the economic impact of a library look like in our community is a story that we really have to tell a little bit better, I think, because without a library, where is the heart and soul of the community? And where do a lot of folks go who maybe do end up on these other fringes have to go? So I think that funding is a continued challenge. One that also is helped through and by ALA from grants that we give out to libraries to help with programming, as well as federal funding that ALA advocates for on the national level through our Public Policy and Advocacy Office. I also see safety as an issue right now for so many library workers. We saw this in full force, you know, especially during the height of the pandemic, and was honestly one of the reasons that I ran for ALA president. You know, I saw and it felt unsafe in so many situations as a public librarian, you know, during doing curbside service. And I worked in a pretty wonderful library that did very well to protect us and gave us so many wonderful accommodations that I know that other library workers were not able to get. And so I think that safety is a continued issue, and also pairs with book challenges as we are looking at threats to library worker safety over these book challenges, right? And same thing with funding. We're seeing threats to funding over book challenges, and individuals saying that they're going to pull funding if these books are on the shelves, or we're going to show up to your drag queen story time armed. I know that our administrations care, and I know that our administrations want the best for us. And so we need to make sure that we are able to support our library administrators in creating and providing safe environments for library workers at all levels. And finally, I think that retention is an issue. We have heard and seen, I'm so glad that I get to talk to library school students, because it provides hope, right? But I also want to be realistic with library school students on the environments that they're going into, because they're not always going to be easy. And from the pandemic, from book challenges, we have seen a number of individuals leave the profession. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do internally. To your question earlier on how can we support, I think that a lot of those ways that we can support our profession also apply to retention and safety and funding as well.
And that's a nice segue to thinking about the skills that students will need to confront some of these challenges going forward. And I was wondering, what do you think is the future of the MLIS, MLS degree, and what should these ALA accredited institutions be doing to help the graduates have the skills they need to address these real world needs in our communities?
Such a controversial topic, Joe. Thank you.
It's a meaty one. Yep.
It's a meaty one. And I don't know that there is always a right answer, right? And I think that the MLIS degree is necessary for that ideological foundation, especially as we are looking at things like book bans and book challenges, right? Like having that core within the program of what our professional values are, what they mean to us as professionals, and how they show up in our work is an essential foundation that we need to have as we are going into divisive and heated, sometimes political situations. And so, but I also think that our MLIS programs need to continue growing and changing also to investigate and prepare students for the realities of today's libraries. I think that some of the ways that programs have done that, and that I've been able to be a part of in some programs, is to bring in practitioners to pair with LIS faculty, to be able to connect the ideological with the everyday, and encourage and support visits to practitioners, encourage internships. I was working in a public library when I started library school. I started off as a library page. But I think that the internship that I was able to do was really helpful. And if you can make them paid internships, that's even all the better, which I was able to do, right? Because especially if we're in library school, we are graduate students. A lot of folks are working full time, or my program was completely in person. So it was difficult for us to work full time. And so we still needed to eat. So I could not take an internship that I was not paid for. So I think that is a really important thing to be built into LIS programs, and to also be realistic with our students about the job market and what that looks like. It's very competitive right now, and it's a wonderful thing for us as hiring managers. But as I alluded to earlier, I know what it's like to get 30 rejections for jobs and how frustrating that can be. So thinking about all of the different ways also that we can apply our library degrees outside of libraries to market our skills, because our research skills are really wonderful to have. The customer service skills that we also gain are really wonderful to have and translate into so many different areas. The technology skills that we have to be librarians today are also essential. And I think that we also at ALA need to continue to look at the accreditation standards and whether or not they are meeting the needs of our students today. And so the Committee on Accreditation does review the accreditation standards every 5 years. They just completed a review of those standards, and the ALA Executive Board has asked has asked the Committee on Accreditation to make a commitment to centering equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice into those revisions. And so there will be a set of revisions that are going to come before ALA Council in June. I believe the final draft is out there right now with a lot of input, but making sure that we have open and honest dialogues around the accreditation standards and the application of the standards is also essential to preserving the MLIS, but also preparing our degree holders for what is to come.
And that might be a committee, maybe some people listening in today might want to consider serving on in the years ahead as well. I'm glad you mentioned about the value of internships as well. And I know I personally feel like I got so much out of my own internship experience some 20 some years ago when I was able to intern at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore. It was a very different model than where I was working at Baltimore County Public Library at the time. And it was just really great to have that experience, and just added a lot of context to how I would be providing service in the years ahead. And I would also encourage folks listening, if you are a manager or a leader in your own library, to consider offering an internship opportunity to students through the program too, and give them that real world experience. I know I just supervised an intern at my own library, and it was just a valuable opportunity, and to really hear about what this individual was learning at the school as well. So let's talk a little bit about maybe what you wish you would have learned when you were getting your own MLS degree or MLIS degree, that you wish you would have known at this point in your career.
Yeah, so I will say the #1 class that I regret not taking is cataloging. Take your cataloging class, everybody, because I think cataloging is misunderstood quite often, but it is the gateway, honestly, to a lot of equity, diversity, and inclusion issues within libraries, because that's how we find books, right? Like in my own library, we just found that a lot of queer literature is not properly cataloged in the adult section in the same way that it is in the young adult section. So there was a lot of lesbian fiction that we were unable to find because those search terms weren't included in the records. So we had to go back and redo everything. And another example of the importance of cataloging, and then I'll get off that high horse, is when I was a children's librarian, I noticed that a lot of the indigenous mythologies were under the legends and folk tales section rather than in the religion section with like Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And so because I work for a smaller library district, we're able to do a lot of things on our own without a lot of bureaucracy. So we moved all of the indigenous religious things from the 398s into the 200s where they belong. So I'm very proud of that, but just also know the power that cataloging can have and the power that you can have in the library to make change is really important. That was a much easier sell than I thought it was going to be with my administration also, though it was a lot of work for everyone. But one of the things that I wish I had known during my MLIS program is the diversity of paths that are available. So when I started my MLIS program, I had just gotten off of trying to be an elementary school teacher. I went to 2 days of credential classes and I was like, this is not for me. Let me try being a librarian, which was my plan B, what I was going to do when I burnt out from being a teacher. And so I was going to be a children's librarian. I was going to be a branch manager. And then I was going to get my PhD in LIS and close out my career teaching libraries. Obviously, that has gone in a very different path. ALA president was never on that path. Executive director of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association was never on that path. Consulting work was never on that path, and thinking that I could, provide advice and leadership to people and they would pay me for it. The skills that we talked about earlier that we get through MLIS programs, through our member leadership experiences, can take us into so many different routes, so many different types of libraries, and our careers are so long in libraries, whether it's your first career, your second career, or your third, you still got at least 10 years probably, at least ahead of you. And so just explore all of the opportunities, even explore getting into the vendor world and what that looks like, or the consortium world. I mean, I've been a dedicated public servant, but I'm also not against supporting library workers in the future also. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. So definitely be open to where your path takes you.
You are so inspiring. I'm just so, I feel inspired just hearing you. I feel like I'm getting advice just hearing you. So we do have some questions from our audience members, and I want to make sure to give you a chance to respond to some of these questions. So one person had asked if you could share your thoughts about how libraries can support their communities, considering that many individuals can't even agree on objective facts anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so especially when misinformation came up hot and heavy during the 2016 presidential election, one of the things my library thought that we were going to do was educate our community on misinformation. So we were going to hold a program, and we were going to do critical thinking skills. We were going to teach research skills, because we were like, this is what the community wants. They want to know how to decipher between what is real, what is not, what is fact, what is misinformation. Nobody came to that, because they were deciding for themselves with the tools that they had. And we have seen that kind of behavior continue. And so there's a couple of things that I think are important when thinking about misinformation and getting frustrated at it. I mean, I was just in conversation last night with some folks, and I heard some very horrifying misinformation coming up that some states might have to secede from the union and then reapply to become states again. And they had it on good authority that in about a year, that's going to happen. And I was like, what thread of the Black web are you on to have heard? I was just so fascinated, because it's somebody that I trust also that came with this information. And so I think that it's important to question it. Somebody else in that conversation came in very, very well trained. Can you tell me more about that? Where did you hear that? What other facts or supporting sources have you seen, right? It's a conversation rather than a smackdown. But I think that we have to not be afraid to stop it in its tracks and not let disinformation take over the narrative, and know how to appeal to your community, right? Within that space, the other person knew how to talk to them about figuring out whether or not those were real facts or maybe some rumors, because disinformation lives in mistrust, right? So we have to build trust with one another to be able to have those conversations and figure out why mistrust might occur, because a lot of disinformation is also bred out of mistrust and preys on the fear that individuals have. And so I think that you need to identify who are the trusted individuals in your community. How can you partner with them to provide a factual and accurate information? How can you have conversations with your patrons when you hear them citing these things just at the reference desk or just in conversation? And don't let the discouragement overtake you. We know as information professionals just how widespread misinformation is, but we also know as information professionals how to combat it. And so know that you have power in this space. Just build the trust to be able to use that power with those who need it the most.
Very good. Well, can you also talk about how you center healing and collective care in your work? I know my own library is right now we're being trained on trauma-informed care. So I think that's somewhat related here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to know who's doing your training, because I'm always interested in, in learning more and being appropriately trained. Because I think that one of the things that I really value is that I came up in a community that valued collective care, that valued being a part of a community and not just being an individual. So I always approach everything from that lens of how are we going to do this work together? And if we can't do this work together, what are some of the barriers? What are some of the human barriers that there are? And that's where I think you have to center healing. If you don't start with looking at the collective as a group of individuals who are coming with their own traumas and joys and painful things and barriers, then we can't overcome those together. And I think that it's really important also that we have to center healing and collective care in libraries for our patrons, but also for our library workers, right? We saw this coming out of the pandemic, the need for library workers to be recognized, not just as vessels of book jockeys, but as people who were also going through the same trauma that our communities were going through. Because if we are not able to take care of ourselves as library workers, we are of no good to our communities. We can't help them unless we like put on your oxygen mask first before you try to put on somebody else's. And so I think that if we center humanness both for ourselves and also for our patrons, and know that when they come in screaming at us, that it's probably not about us, I think it's much easier for us to be, yeah, right. Just like,
I just had this conversation with someone today, just today.
Like, it's not about you. You're able to remove yourself from that, because you're not allowing yourself to be triggered because you know that that is about them. So I also think that it's important when we're talking about collective care and we're talking about a collective voice, that when we are talking about library workers and staff, how do we use our collective voice? Right? How do we ask for the things that we need? And how do we work with, if you're not in a position of power to give it, if you're not in administration, how do we have that conversation? You know, it's not all about standing desks and days off. It's about the quality of days off. And I still want my standing desk, but that's a different conversation. But there's lots of different ways, right? It doesn't have to be a union. It can be a sunshine committee also. Like, who's planning the parties? Who's planning the joy in this space? Who's bringing joy to our patrons? You know, I think that collective care and centering healing, it's all of our work, and we have to do it together. And we should be able to have fun at work too.
We should. Oh my gosh, we should always be able to have fun at work. I heartily agree with that.
That's why I got into libraries, because it looks like so much fun.
Exactly. Okay, well, all right. Another question. Sorry, we have to go a little darker for a moment, but how do you see the rise in government-sponsored censorship impacting libraries and librarians' ability to serve their communities?
Yeah, I think that it makes it impossible for us to serve our communities when our government institutions are creating legislation that prevent us from doing so. Whether it is legislation that doesn't allow us to have certain books on the shelves, to put certain books on display on the shelves, or to provide access to information about things like reproductive health, right? And we're not talking sending somebody, you know, for reproductive, we're talking general information about things. Our literal job is to provide access to information. And so when we see government-sponsored censorship, we are unable to do our jobs, which leads to self-censorship, right? People rethinking the things that they're going to put in their collection, because do they want to deal with a potential book challenge? Is this going to appear sexually explicit, which is a very ambiguous term? It instills a lot of fear in our library workers who are not sure what their future might be or when an attack might come, whether it is an ideological attack or even a physical attack. And it just doesn't allow us to serve our communities and their needs. And when we're not able to serve our communities, it's not just one or two groups that are at stake, right? Then we also are not able to provide services to veterans. We're not able to provide services to small business owners. We're not able to provide services to the teens who are trying to study and do their homework and get ready to go to college. Our 3D maker spaces don't get used. You know, there are just so many things that are at risk when we are looking down the barrel of legislation that goes against our shared national values, also of democracy and First Amendment rights. So nobody wins in these situations except for those who think that they are going to remain in power and have the world that they want. But I don't think it's going to come out the way that they think it is or look the way that they want it to.
Thank you. And I see, I'm looking in the Q&A here in the Zoom as well. And I see we have a shout out and a link to about the 11th National Conference of African American Librarians coming up. So you can follow that link in the Q&A. Thank you. And let's see, we have a question here from Wendy. about school librarians, and I have another question about school librarians too. But Wendy's saying, are you concerned that technology is replacing physical books and even the process of reading narratives, and students being distracted by TikTok, Instagram, etc.?
Yeah, so you're talking to the TikTok queen right now. No, not a TikTok queen who creates content, but one who consumes a lot of it. And I think that one of the things that we have to realize is that these are not going away, right? Like social media, technology, they are going to continue to capture the minds and interests of our youth, but also of our adults. And so how do we incorporate responsible technology use? How do we use technology to our advantage? I think is how I like to look at the issue. One of the best things about TikTok is book talk. I learned so much about what books are out there, and I get to fangirl with other folks over the exciting things that we've read, as well as Instagram. I have found so many authors that I never would have heard from before because of these social media arenas. And so I think that while it is challenging, I think that there have always been distractions that capture the attention of our youth and our adults. And so this is just one that we can easily leverage, I think, into working for our advantage and meeting our teens where they are also to create content and to create responsible content as well. There's a lot of opportunity there, I think.
And I would add, thinking about probably younger children, there's some great training out there about media mentorship and what is that right approach to using media within a school environment, a library environment as well. That we had a question that came in before today's session about the future of a librarian in a school setting. So would you be able to talk about maybe some of the challenges that school libraries are facing?
Yeah, I think that a number of school libraries are facing challenges, not only of book censorship, but also of having certified school librarians in every school, and funding for that and support for that. And so I think that we have to ensure that our school boards and departments of education know just how essential a school librarian is and how much their students gain in educational attainment and enrichment by having a school librarian on site. We had an ALA Connect Live on Tuesday on National Library Workers Day focused on the ecosystem of support for school librarians and what that looks like. And our first speaker, Keith Curry-Lance, shared some statistics about school librarians and kind of the waves of funding school librarians and what that looks like and how it matches the environments that we're living in. So that was a really interesting, just kind of 5-minute, he can say it much better. I'm not even going to try to paraphrase some of the challenges that he shared, but there are also statistics, like I said, on just how much students benefit from having school librarians. And so making sure that we have those statistics in our pockets whenever we are going to talk to teachers or other politicians when they visit our libraries to do a story time, speaking to the value of this. And because we have to invest in school libraries. And I do also want to mention, since we are talking about school libraries, just yesterday, Representative or Congressman Jack Reed and Raul Grijalva introduced the Right to Read Act in support of school libraries and to provide resources to school libraries. And so I think there we see the benefit of federal advocacy, right? They brought this act last year as well, but it didn't go anywhere. And so, but they brought it back again. And so keeping it in the forefront of everyone's mind is essential, and is also essential, I think, to how libraries do advocacy and how we can participate in that larger national level. But I'm sure Joe could speak to that much better also as past chair of committee on legislation than I can.
Well, I'm happy to give any updates if you'd like, but really, like, I think one thing that I think it's important for folks to know is that, ALA has a very intentional approach to advancing legislation, and we craft a legislative agenda every year, and the Committee on Legislation is responsible for really putting that together. And there's a lot of carryover from prior years, but really what we want to do every year is really focus on that legislation that has the greatest chance of advancing during that legislative, during that that Congress. So, it changes year to year. Like one year when I was first, involved in the committee, we were focused on the census because that was, where the money was, and we wanted to make sure it was a successful count. The following year, of course, we were then into COVID, and we wanted to make sure that libraries were getting the financial benefit and the money that was necessary to be able to serve their communities in that capacity. But overall, one of the things that we're always committed to is making sure that LSTA, Library Services and Technology Act, and innovative approaches to literacy through the Department of Education is supported. So we just went through that whole phase of calling our members of the House and the Senate and making sure that they signed on to those letters supporting LSTA and IAL, those Dear Appropriator letters that basically commit them to supporting that legislation. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody here that made those phone calls, sent those tweets, sent those emails. It all really does make a difference. Even if a member of Congress, their staff, they're reading these, they get 10, messages, like that's important. Like it shows that there's members of their community that care about libraries, they care about this only source of federal funding for libraries. So it really does matter. So thank you everyone that made those calls and contacts this year, last year, the prior year. We're going to ask you to do it again next year. So thank you in advance for doing it next year. So Lessa, I hope it's okay. I just took a couple minutes to sort of make that shout out and call to action.
Absolutely. That is one of the most essential things that ALA does. So thank you for doing that. And thank you also for leading that for so many years and continuing to participate and be on that committee. Thank you, Joe.
Well, I'm just a member now. I do want to give kudos to our chair, Ed Garcia, who works up at the Cranston Library in Rhode Island. He's a fantastic leader of the committee, and glad to serve with him and the other members of the committee. I do want to see, I think there's like another question here that we haven't gotten to that's in the chat. I see from Twana. What work in terms of training, workshops, outreach, promotion, etc., has been happening in regards to mental health in the profession?
Yeah, so there's a couple of studies that I want to point out first in case folks aren't aware of them. One is by Katrina Davis Kendrick, and it's called Leaving the Low Morale Experience, a qualitative study, which was published in ALCI, which is Washington Library Association's journal, which talks about the workplace stressors that library workers have, like understaffing, over-reliance on part-time employees, high turnover, and which then in turn leads to degraded availability of quality of library services. Some of the things that we discussed earlier, as well as I want to mention the 2022 Urban Library Trauma Study that talked about the repetitive cycle of outside stressors and adverse events that affect our professional community and the internalization of those traumatic experiences. So those two studies have been really informative on some of the things that I've been looking for and trying to advocate for during my presidential year through our ALA Allied Professional Association, which is ALA's 501c6 companion organization that has the ability to advocate for and on behalf of library workers, whereas as a 501c3, the American Library Association cannot do some of those things. And so through ALA APA, there is a section on wellness that was started by Dr. Laureen Roy when she was ALA president and refurbished by Loida Garcia-Febo during her presidency, that focuses on the 8 different areas of wellness that we need to be whole and complete library workers. And I know that Loida has also done a number of wellness programs since then. And I believe she's like the wellness chair or something now for San Jose State University as iSchool. So there is a lot of work out there that is happening. There are also a lot of workshops. I know in the state of California, we have a number of mental health workshops, one on mental health training for mental health in libraries on how we can help our patrons, but also on how we can help ourselves. So I really encourage folks, to take a look at your local consortium, as well as your state libraries to see what they're providing for you in those areas of training.
Thank you. And before we turn things back over to Keith and the members of the iSchool here at College Park, I do want to note that I'm glad to see you're being recognized by leaders across the country, including apparently the governor of California. I don't know if this is showing up, but I saw just this morning, I don't know if this tweet is kind of a little too bright here, but I was glad to see that the office of the governor of California sent a tweet out, I think it was just yesterday, in recognition of National Library Week. And he said, as president of the American Library Association, she, Lessa, is a fierce advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion. So it was a shout out to all California librarians and especially you. So I'm glad to see that you're being recognized by your own governor.
Thank you. It was such a
Kudos.
surprise in my email inbox. Thank you. I was like, that's it. I'm famous now. I'm done.
That was pretty awesome. And I know that got retweeted out by the public policy and advocacy staff at ALA as well. So I encourage you to follow their tweets too. I don't see any other questions or anything that I don't think we've already addressed. So I'm going to turn things back over to Keith.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Joe and Lessa, for that wonderful conversation. That was very insightful as well as just fun. Thank you very much. And that's a wrap for what we have here. Thank you for attending this University of Maryland School ALA lecture. We're delighted to have this partnership with ALA in doing this. And to all our students, I hope you listen to the importance of taking a course in cataloging. That sounded perfect. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.